Welcome to a special podcast on corona COVID-19 related to people with primary immunodeficiency, hosted by me, Lisette Rådström, with Professor Lennart Hammarström from Karolinska Institute as guest and expert, joining by phone. Welcome, Lennart, and thank you for taking time to reassure our listeners, persons living with PID and others who are related to them in some way. Primary immunodeficiency patients are, of course, extremely vulnerable these days. How worried should they be?
Well, they shouldn't be really too worried because, in essence, most people will actually get infected, and PID patients are not more susceptible to catching the infection. The problem for them is that the consequences might be more dire, particularly if they, at the same time, have a concomitant disease like autoimmunity, or if they have cardiovascular disease or any other respiratory tract disease to start with. That puts them in a specific category of high risk.
What kind of precautions should they take out of the ordinary for anyone who wants to stay healthy, like washing hands and staying away from crowds?
Well, basically, it's just to fulfill these things because there's nothing else for the time being that they can do. What their friends and relatives can do is to be more careful because they should realize that if they do get the infection, the consequences might be more severe. So the general rule is, of course, to follow the suggestions by the health authorities, and furthermore to keep distance, to not visit unnecessarily, or to keep social contacts that are unnecessary.
How about the ordinary treatment for this patient group? I guess they should continue taking their ordinary immunoglobulin as usual.
Oh, yes, because, that protects against other diseases, but it should be pointed out that there's no protection whatsoever against the new coronavirus in the gamma globulin that is currently being given, because at the time when this gamma globulin was produced, this virus was not circulating in the population, and therefore there are absolutely no antibodies against the coronavirus in the present preparations.
So basically you're answering this question already, because it doesn't protect them from COVID-19, which is the illness caused by the coronavirus.
No, but it does protect them against all the other diseases that have been circulating in the population and where we have antibodies in the general population.
Is there something else that they should think of regarding treatment?
Well, not really. These are the normal precautions, and they should be aware that they may be in the risk group and keep contact with the doctor that usually takes care of them.
Here in Sweden, we do have some problems with hoarding, and I think that is a global phenomena right now, and that includes different medicines. What is your comment on that?
Well, I don't think there's any necessity to do that. And there's nothing really we can do. The gamma globulins will be there for them, and other forms of treatment like antibiotics will be there, and the authorities will make sure that it will be there. One cloud on the horizon is that much of the raw penicillin and stuff that is being used to process antibiotics and make the special forms of antibiotics that we have is being made in China, and there has been a hiccup in the production of those, but I think that will be overcome now when the disease is limited in China and they're going back to production.
Might there be a time, you think, when the pharmaceutical companies will have problem collecting plasma to fulfill the needs?
Well, I hope that the plasma collection should be running as normal, and I hope that people who have recovered from the disease will be more than willing to continue to donate, and there should not be any stop in the production or the collection of plasma. And with time, the gamma globulin, the ordinary gamma globulin, will contain antibodies against this virus, but it will take another 1 or 2, maybe 3 years before we have enough of those. So in the short run, what some of the companies are currently trying to do is to make a hyperimmune globulin product, which is, of course, taken from patients who have recovered, what we refer to as convalescent sera, and process that because that contains the antibodies that you need to combat the virus.
What about the infection risks? Are persons with PID more susceptible of new viruses, you say?
No, they're not really more susceptible. This virus will infect everybody and anybody. And the only thing is that patients with PID do have a greater risk of developing complications as a consequence of the infection.
And if a spouse or child of a PID patient is infected, what is your advice in those cases?
Well, in most cases, it's just to isolate themselves, stay home, and follow the development on the news and from the authorities about what to do. Once you do develop more symptoms, of course, you should contact the health authorities and or your doctor and make sure that you're being taken care of.
Would you say it's wise to keep your child at home even if he or she is healthy? I mean, I know many countries have decided that all children must be kept away from school and daycare, but if this is not the case?
Well, this is a difficult question because it all depends on what kind of disease you're having. Some kinds of primary immunodeficiency diseases do not really have a greater risk, whereas some patients would be susceptible. And again, the advice is to discuss this point with your doctor.
Normally, people with PID won't get a high temperature, so what kind of symptoms should they react on?
Well, you should react on the normal things that goes with infections. You're tired, you feel fatigue. Coughing, of course, is a major one. But also in this coronavirus case, there's diarrhea because the receptor that the virus binds to is also present in the gastrointestinal tract. So any of those sort of ordinary, perhaps minor symptoms should be taken with care, and you should report that if you do have a severe case of any of those.
When is it time to try to do a corona test?
Well, according to my humble opinion, any time, because I think that testing is the most important thing you can do, because without being tested, you don't know what you're having. And also, I think that more widespread testing would be valuable because many of those infected, they're not sick. They're just spreading the disease. And if you do test them and you can show that this is coronavirus, that will make them more eager to follow the suggestions by the authorities to isolate themselves. Because otherwise, if you feel perfectly healthy, what would be the point in isolating yourself for 2 or 3 weeks?
It's not always easy to get a test. Sometimes it's very restricted. Is it something that PID patients can demand to get?
No, you cannot really demand it because what the authorities, at least here in Sweden, have said that is only for those severe cases and those who are in hospital that will be tested. But my view, as I stated, would be that I think that more widespread testing would be valuable, and that is what we and others are working for, to sway the opinion so we'll have more testing. Take the example of South Korea, where there was mass testing and where the epidemic now is curbed, which is mainly due to the fact that they could isolate and find anybody who was infected and keep them in quarantine. I think the same thing could and should have been done in Sweden.
Why do you think that is? Why don't we test people to that extent? Is it
because
money?
I think no, it's not money, because the test doesn't really cost a whole lot of money. I think it was the availability of the test and the limits that the healthcare sector for providing the test as such, because you have to go there, you have to take the test, so it's a burden on the health system.
We don't have the infrastructure for it right now.
We have the infrastructure, but it's not enough, because this is going to be overwhelming. We're talking about tens of thousands of patients that would be, or individuals that would have to be tested, and for the time being, that is not in place. I do know, though, that is ongoing, and we will theoretically have the capacity to do that within the next few days or weeks. The matter is whether that is going to be implemented by the authorities.
It will be interesting to see, but I mean, because one day we will be out of this and it's time to look at the future, and there will be more viruses like that, and we have to, it's going to be interesting to see the sort of evaluation and what we're going to do for next time, and maybe testing is not such a bad idea for next time, if you understand what I mean.
Yes, I think that is what will be the conclusion, but we're not quite there yet.
Yeah. And if you do get infected, as a PID patient, what's most important?
Stay home, stay away, and limit social contacts to a minimum, and do keep in touch with your doctor or the healthcare authorities if your symptoms deteriorate.
Right. Once this worst crisis is over, there will be a vaccine available one day in a year or so. Is that maybe, hopefully?
Because it should be realized that in the SARS epidemic in 2003, there were very many people working on trying to make a vaccine, and still 17 years later, we don't have one.
Ah, I see. So let us dream for a bit. Should this?
Well, I hope, because this is the best thing.
Yeah.
So I do hope it will be possible to develop it. But meanwhile, we shouldn't disregard the possibilities of antiviral drugs, which are currently being tested large scale, and or good old-fashioned passive immunity, where you provide antibodies to combat the virus as a prophylaxis or as a treatment in the early stages of the disease.
Right. So there is hope, at least, I think, is what
There's definitely hope.
And should we come to a day where we actually have a vaccine, and I know this is pure speculation, but would PID patients be able to take such a vaccine?
Well, this is a difficult question, because we don't know. I mean, this is the question that relates also to the ordinary flu vaccine for primary immunodeficiency patients. And the consensus for the time being that as long as it doesn't hurt, take it, because it might do some benefit. But we don't have markers to say that, yes, you're going to be protected, and no, you're not going to be protected. So it's just taking a chance. If it doesn't hurt you, take it.
Right. As always, we have to rely on science and scientific research, but let's also hope that people can be nice to one another and take care of each other in these terrible times. Who knows? There might come something good out of this too. We might learn that nature is a force we need to respect more and not always conquer very easily. Lennart, thank you very much for taking the time.
You're welcome.
And if this develops in such a way that we should return with a new episode on the same topic, then of course we do. Thank you so much for listening, and thank you to CSL Bering for enabling us to produce the podcast.